This episode of the Story Cottage is brought to you by our friends at Domestic Dominion, the Kings Ridge Elderberries, and our supporters on Buzzsprout. Go to thestorycottage.buzzsprout.com or click the Support the Show link in the show notes and subscribe for just $5 a month to get every episode ad-free. And now, on with the show. Fairy tales, folklore, myths, and legends. Why do children need them? Why do nations and peoples create them? Who knows? Maybe some of them are real. Maybe some are merely imaginative. Is there a hidden wisdom worth finding in these tall tales? Proverbs 1:5-6 says, "Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles." We're your hosts, Jerry and Amy Davidson. Welcome to the Story Cottage. Please step inside. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who had no children. They longed very much for a child, and when at last they had a little daughter, they were both delighted, and great rejoicings took place. When the time came for the little princess to be christened, the king made a grand feast and invited all but one of the fairies in his kingdom to be godmothers. There happened to be 13 fairies in the kingdom, but as the king had only 12 gold plates, he had to leave one of them out. The 12 fairies that were invited came to the christening and presented the little princess with the best gifts in their possession. One gave her beauty, one gave her wisdom, another grace, another goodness, until all but one had presented their offerings. Just as the last fairy was about to step forward and offer her gift, there came a tremendous knocking at the door. And before anybody could get there to open it, it was burst open, and in came the 13th fairy, in a furious rage at not having been invited to the feast. When she saw all the gifts which the other fairies had presented the child, she laughed and exclaimed,
"A lot of good all this beauty and virtue and wealth will do to you, my pretty princess. You shall pay for the slight your royal father has put upon me."
Then, turning to the terrified king and queen, she said in a loud voice,
"When the princess is 15 years old, she shall prick her finger with a spindle and die."
The king and queen were in despair, and the courtiers stood aghast at the terrible disaster, while the little princess began to cry piteously, as if she knew the fate in store for her. Then the 12th fairy stepped forward.
"Do not be afraid,"
she said.
"I have not yet given my gift. I cannot undo the wicked spell, but I can soften the evil. The princess, on her 15th birthday, shall prick her finger with a spindle, but she shall not die. Instead, she shall fall asleep for 100 years.
"Alas!"
cried the queen.
"What comfort will that be to us? Long before the 100 years are past, we shall be dead, and our darling child will be as lost to us as if she were indeed to die." "I can make that right,"
said the fairy.
"When the princess falls asleep, you shall sleep too, and awaken with her when the 100 years are past."
But the king still hoped to save his daughter from such a terrible misfortune. So he ordered all the spinning wheels in his kingdom to be burnt or destroyed, and made a law that no one was to use one on pain of instant death. But all his care was useless. On her 15th birthday, the princess slipped away from her attendants and wandered all through the palace. At last she came to a tower which she had never seen before, and wondering what it contained, she climbed the stairs. From a room at the top came a curious humming noise, and the princess, wondering what it could be, pushed open the door and stepped inside. There sat an old woman, bent with age, working at a strangely shaped wheel. The princess was full of curiosity.
What is that funny-looking thing?
She asked.
It's a spinning wheel, princess,
answered the old woman, who was no other than the wicked fairy in disguise.
A spinning wheel? What is that? I've never heard of such a thing,
said the princess. She stood watching for a few minutes, then she added,
It looks quite easy. May I try to do it?
Certainly, gracious lady,
said the wicked fairy, and the princess sat down and tried to turn the wheel. But no sooner did she lay her hand upon it than the spindle, which was enchanted, pricked her finger, and the princess fell back against a silk-covered couch, fast asleep. In a moment, a deep silence fell upon all who were in the castle.
Honey! I need help!
Why? What's wrong?
There are dragons in our laundry and dishwasher!
Hang on, dear. I'm getting my sword.
No, wait. These dragons cannot be killed by a sword.
They've never tasted my blade.
I know, but all we need to kill these dragons is detergent from Domestic Dominion.
Okay, then we must make haste. How do we get some?
By going to domestic-dominion.com and entering code STORY. Ladies, our husbands are great for so many things, including slaying the run-of-the-mill dragons. But sometimes there are monsters that sneak through even the best defenses, like the toxins and chemicals in your laundry and dish detergents. And often, those supposedly clean detergents at the store are just pretty little poisoned apples. That's where Domestic Dominion can help. They're a small, family-owned and operated Christian business whose mission is to create clean, natural, quality products that aid the homemaker and create a culture of joy, health, and stewardship to the glory of God. They value the Lord and therefore value their products. All their products are effective and made with only 4 ingredients. Each product is non-toxic, pH balanced, and contains no surfactants, fragrances, or chemicals. They leave no chemical residue, and their laundry detergent is safe to use on any kind of clothing. We use their products in our home, and let me tell you, every load comes out smelling the way Cinderella's dress looks. With Domestic Dominion, you'll have a ball doing laundry. Go to their website, domestic-dominion.com, or click the link in the show notes. And use code STORY for 20% off your first order. And be sure to check out their aprons, linen covers, and anti-feminist stickers while you're there. That's domestic-dominion.com and use code STORY for 20% off your first order.
Tired of evil fairies using cold and flu season to turn you and your children into ogres every year? Yeah, me too. This cold and flu season, fortify your defenses naturally with the King's Ridge elderberry syrup and elderberry products. They grow the freshest elderberries on their Indiana farm, hand-pick and cold-press them into the tastiest syrup around. And they are packed with antioxidants and vitamins to boost your immune system. Defend the castle of your family's health. Use code STORY10 for 10% off your first order at tkrfarm.com. The King's Ridge elderberry syrup. Taste the difference. Help push back the curse. That's tkrfarm.com and use code STORY10 for 10% off your first order. The king fell asleep in the midst of his counselors, the queen with her ladies in waiting. The horses in the stable, the pigeons on the roof, the flies on the walls, even the very fire upon the hearth fell asleep too. The meat which was cooking in the kitchen ceased to frizzle, and the cook, who was just about to box the kitchen boy's ears, fell asleep with her hand outstretched and began to snore aloud. The butler, who was tasting the ale, fell asleep with the jug at his lips. A great hedge sprang up around the castle, which, as the years passed, grew and grew until it formed an impenetrable barrier around the sleeping palace. The old people of the country died, and their children grew up and died also, and their children, and the story of the sleeping princess became a legend, handed down from one generation to another. And a cloud of mystery, as thick and impenetrable as the hedge of thorns, lay over the old castle. Many brave and gallant princes tried to force their way through the magic hedge in order to solve the mystery and to see for themselves the beautiful maiden who lay in an enchanted sleep behind that thorny barrier. But the thorns caught them and held them from going forward or back, and the gallant youths perished miserably in the thickets. After many, many years, there came a king's son into that country who heard the story of the princess and the hedge of briars, and he made up his mind to try and force his way to the castle to awake the sleeping princess. People told him of the fate of the other princes, who had also attempted this difficult task, but the prince would not be warned.
I have made up my mind to see the maiden of whose beauty I have heard so many wonderful tales,
he cried.
I will force a way through the hedge of thorns and awake this sleeping beauty, or die in the attempt.
Now it happened that this day was the last day of the 100 years, and when the prince came to the thicket that surrounded the castle and began to push his way through, he found that the briars yielded readily to his touch. The thorns had all blossomed into roses that scented the air with fragrance as he went by. Primroses sprang up before his feet and made a pathway to lead him straight to the castle gates, and the birds suddenly broke forth into singing, as if to tell the world that the 100 years of enchantment were over, and the princess about to be awakened from her long sleep. The prince passed through the council chamber where the king and his counselors were sleeping, through the room where the queen and her ladies slept. He passed on from hall to hall, climbed from stair to stair, until at last he reached the tower chamber where the sleeping princess lay. For a moment, he stood and gazed in wonder at her lovely face. Then he sank on his knees beside her and kissed her as she lay asleep. Instantly, the spell was broken. The king and queen awoke, and all the courtiers with them. The horses neighed in the stables and shook their glossy manes. The pigeons cooed upon the roof. The flies on the wall moved again. The fire burnt up brightly, and the meat in the kitchen began to frizzle once more as the spit turned round. The cook gave the kitchen boy the tremendous box on the ear that she had started to give him 100 years ago. And everything and everybody went on just as usual, as if nothing at all out of the common had occurred. And up in the tower chamber, the princess opened her eyes to meet the gaze of the prince, who had dared to risk his life for her sake. What they said to each other, nobody quite knows, for nobody was there to hear or see. But whatever it was, it must have been something very satisfactory, for very soon after they were married and lived happily ever afterwards. All right, welcome to episode 4 of the Story Cottage, and hope you enjoyed that one. That's a little bit of a shorter story, but we love it. It's our daughter's absolute favorite story. All right, let's launch into our questions.
Yeah, so what sort of values do we see in the characters in this story? Well, first we see that the evil fairy values herself most. She wants attention, and when she doesn't get it, she tries to murder an innocent girl to get back at the parents who offended her. Second, we see that the king and queen value their little girl, but their fear leads them astray, and they forget to prepare her for what she will face one day. We'll get into this a little more here in a bit.
Yeah, and thirdly now, we see the prince. He values courage, boldness, and daring. He hears this legend of Sleeping Beauty and the many young men who have died trying to find her, and his reaction is, bet. Let's go. I'm the one who will succeed. That is a man who values goodness and virtue. He sees the danger with a worthy prize at the end, and he doesn't even hesitate. He doesn't let the discouraging voices of others sway him too from the conviction he knows is good. All right, next question. What can you learn to apply these things in your daily life?
Well, don't be easily offended, and give grace to those who offend you or harm you, or even appear to offend you. Easier said than done. You know you're driving in the car and someone cuts you off or is going too slow. Give them grace and don't get angry.
You can even practice telling yourself a story about how maybe they didn't see you, or were in a bad wreck once and drive more carefully now, or are older so they drive slower. Do the same thing with people who maybe forgot to respond to your text, even if it shows they read it. You never know what someone's days are really like. So be gracious, don't be offended, and tell yourself better stories that make it easier to react well.
That's great, baby. Next, parents, train your kids for what they have to face in their lives. This doesn't mean one day throwing them to the wolves like the Spartans did. This also doesn't mean being a tyrannical helicopter parent that never lets their kid face anything for themselves. The king should have perhaps removed all the spindles from the castle, but he didn't need to threaten death to anyone in his kingdom who even owned one. He should have trained Sleeping Beauty to know what a spindle is and explain what the evil fairy promised to do to her. He should have prepared her and protected her. Now, lastly, boys and men, be brave and be bold. Do this right. It takes time and experience, but make sure you see and take the opportunity to be bold and courageous. This doesn't mean jumping from the highest branch in the tree onto a rock, because that's a quote-unquote bold thing to do. You must be wise and skillful too.
That's good. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Story Cottage, and we can't wait to see you next time.
We'll see you guys then.
Toodaloo.
Thank you for joining us here at The Story Cottage. If you liked what you heard, smash that follow button and leave us a 5-star review. It tremendously helps with the algorithms so folks like you can find us. Go to thestorycottage.buzzsprout.com or click the Support the Show link in the show notes to subscribe for $5 a month to get every episode ad-free. And follow us on X, Instagram, or Facebook. And please, join us next time.